My first love of him is Forrest Gump, directed by Robert Zemeckis from 1994, starring Tom Hanks, Robin Wright, Gary Sinise, Sally Field. I mean, this is probably one of those movies that everybody on the planet knows about,
Hmm.
especially our generation, I would think, the 80s and the 90s. And I started to think, like, is this really the first movie I saw of his? And I couldn't remember because he's sort of been present in my movie mind since ever. I do think that some of the scenes and the dialogues from this movie were the earliest memory that I have of him. And clearly, he must have made an impact. And that's why I wanted to kind of bring this. And I also thought it would be an interesting conversation to have about this movie in connection with here. But I mean, this is, a tour de force performance. Like you go back, it's hard to kind of go back in time and put ourselves in the shoes of what a career Tom Hanks was having and was about to have, like the run that he was going to be on. It's kind of hard to imagine that, but yeah, we all saw it. And this is why he is a movie star. And I think this is one of those tour de force performances where everything in the toolbox and the color box is on display in this movie. And it's a perfect vehicle. And I can't imagine anybody else who can pull this off. There've been movies about people who are quote unquote not smart or challenged mentally or emotionally in some way or the other. And they often end up being, I don't know, caricatures, maybe even offensive, maybe even annoying, what have you. And this movie has a lot going on, right? From the Zelig like storyline to a lot of corny stuff, things that just outrightly don't make sense. Like, why would anybody run for 3 years? I don't know. But it all sort of comes together. And it's not just Tom, there are many other aspects of the movie that work, but he's at the core of it. Like, if you don't buy into Forrest Gump and you don't root for him and you're not along with him for his adventure and you don't care for him, none of it this works. I mean, he's done accents and such in his later career, but not back then. I remember seeing Tom as just Tom.
Right.
But this is definitely a departure from kind of his movie star persona, but the elements are still there. And the thing I was saying about intellect, it's funny to use that word in connection with somebody who has an IQ of 70, as far as Gump, but there is an emotional intelligence to him, even in this character. Like when he says to Jenny, I don't know much things, but I do know what love is. I forget the line. But
Yeah, yeah.
and all that is important because if it were just somebody, flubbing all the time, I don't think it would be a compelling storyline. And you're with him because you care for him, but there's also a spark in him. And because the whole movie revolves around him, you have to buy that Jenny, Robin Rice character, would have something for him, or other people, friends, Gary Sinise, whatever, they will have something for him. So it's an amazing performance. I had not watched this movie in a bajillion years, and I was sort of dreading watching it. And I was very happy to watch it because of him. And also, I know this movie is sort of ridiculed for being maybe corny and too earnest, and you can rip it apart for all sorts of things, but I will say that it communicates emotion, spectacle, epicness of making a movie like this, movies that we don't have anymore, really well. And it did sweep up the whole world. And of course, then the entire world turned on it the moment that happened, which is how things happen, right?
Right.
So I don't know. I kind of want to reclaim a little bit of this movie after watching it after all this time, that it's not perfect, but it does have a lot going for it.
I'd seen this movie for the first time in high school on a school trip. It was like a bus ride,
Ah,
either to DC or New York, and someone put it on. Like I've been aware of the movie just being so popular, but I definitely didn't see it in theaters or like immediately after it came out. And I don't know, maybe it was overhyped to me as a kid. I wasn't really that into it. And then over the years, I've definitely grown to have a strong distaste and dislike for the film. But I'll save that for a little bit. I think I just want to pick up on the Tom Hanks piece, which I focused on a lot in this particular rewatch. And I agree with you. It's First of all, I think this is something that Hanks hasn't really didn't do before and hasn't really done since, where it really is a complete departure from his Tom Hanks persona. Like there's very few bits that are Tom Hanks the movie star in the role and character of Forrest Gump, but him bringing all of the baggage, and I use that word not in a negative way, but the baggage of our love for Tom Hanks and all the movies he's done up until this point allows you to, I think, care for this character and want to follow him more than if this was just a character actor that's been picked out of nowhere. And now we're having to understand and relate to this character, Forrest Gump, which is kind of bizarre in a way, the character. There wouldn't be that baggage you're bringing in this initial love where like, oh, it's Tom Hanks. I'm going to love this guy. Like that's what you see when you first see Forrest Gump. Oh, cool. I'm going to get to have an adventure with Tom Hanks. And then you get the character that he's portraying through that. But I don't think if you had Tom Hanks in this role and it was just someone else, I don't know. I just think the movie would work because this character is so weird. And I mean that in sort of every way possible. Like you said, a lot of things he does don't really make sense in the story, and there's barely any screen time that he has with certain characters that you're supposed to believe there's some a mad magic relationship between him and Robin Wright. And it's without Tom Hanks in this role, I just don't think it would have worked. He brings this everyman quality as well to someone who is not an everyman at all. Like Forrest Gump is, yeah, again, like slow or whatever you want to say, but he uses his humor because Tom Hanks did start out as a sitcom comedy
Hmm.
star and then a big comedy star in movies and then transitioned more into dramatic roles. And he does a lot of jokes in this that keep the levity going, and the movie's very funny. But it's not because we're laughing at Forrest Gump. It's the way that Tom Hanks walks that very fine line of Forrest Gump kind of acting kind of stupid, but you're laughing almost with him, not at him,
Right.
because of the charm that Tom brings to the role. I think, again, as much as I don't enjoy this film, I think his performance deserves all the accolades that it got. I mean, this is a very high wire act that he is walking here
Yeah.
and can do it. And I think that is all credit to what Tom Hanks is able to do in this. I mean, it really is great acting. I'll even call out the one scene that I think works for me on an emotional level, really only one, is when he sees his son and has that conversation with
Oh
Jenny about,
yeah.
oh, is he like me or is he like a normal kid or whatever? Like that little bit of acting, and maybe it's like, I don't know, 30 seconds or something, is phenomenal. Like incredible. Every time I see the movie, which maybe I've seen it like, I don't know, a half a dozen times or something over the last 20, 30 years, that scene always like gets me in terms of like, whoa, like he just really delivers on that very subtle performance of this again, slow guy, but there's something more complicated behind him, even though he is not
Right.
he's a simpleton. But there's other things going on inside of Forrest Gump, and I think that is more to do with Hanks's performance than it is the narrative or anything like Zemeckis is doing as a director. So I think it is a fantastic performance. Even though again I don't like the film, I think this is definitely one of Tom Hanks's best roles and a role I think I don't know if anyone else could have done this. They just wouldn't
Hmm.
have been able to do it.
Yeah. No, I agree.
So on the film, yeah, I mean, I could go on this and just really rip into it, but I'll sort of not not do that so much. But film is the inside of the mind of a baby boomer who again has to make everything about them. Like Forrest has to be at all of these events that are across history. It definitely feels like a Easter egg movie for people that grew up during that time of the 50s 60s 70s sort of coming to age of that and oh remember this, oh this happened, remember this, and you can sit there and be like, oh yeah, no, I remember that. And then the times that it does touch on the real kind of like major political events like the Vietnam War, the movie treats it with kid gloves in a way that it doesn't really feel serious, and they completely sidestep any political statements about that in any way. The Vietnam speech always bothers me every time. He gets up there and it's like the movie has one opportunity to say something about the war in some way, and it completely sidesteps that, which also apparently wasn't in the book too. I guess you do hear what he says in the speech instead of the loudspeaker get disconnected like in the movie. You don't hear anything, and that's supposed to be some poignant moment. I know this has been probably talked about to death in terms of how the movie handles Jenny, which apparently was different in the book. I did not read the book, but the movie punishes her a lot more than the book does. She sort of represents the activists, the people that are out there trying to make a difference. And then throughout the movie, the movie just keeps dumping on her and keep punishing her over and over again, even though she's actually trying to have agency in the world and go out there and do something. Whereas Forrest Gump is doing absolutely nothing. He's just sitting there and letting the current of time sort of drift him down the river like a piece of driftwood, and yet he's getting everything just kind of handed to him. So it's almost like, wait, so you're supposed to not try to change anything and just sort of sit there and good stuff will happen to you? Yeah, it also kind of drags a little bit too. Like the narrative structure is kind of odd. It kind of chugs along in the beginning, and then once he becomes a millionaire out of nowhere and all the money problems kind of go away, like that running scene you talked about,
Makes
like
no
what
sense.
was the like okay, like come on, movie, like wrap this up, get this back to something that the narrative is driving. It's like the episodic nature of it gets kind of boring after a while. So I think
Yeah,
as even
that
as a movie, it just sort of doesn't really work. But you know, the movie obviously was a gigantic hit critically, commercially. Still, people talk about it. Still highly rated, you know, on IMDb. So I'm not to say that this. Yes, people have turned on it. I think, like you said, but it's not been kind of canceled or forgotten. I think this movie will still stick around and just be a curio, and maybe through time, different generations will view it differently. And it'll just be like a prism through which your own life can be read through your thoughts on Forrest Gump or something. But I try to give it a chance every time. Again, I've seen it maybe 6 times, and it's not like I can't sit through it. It's not an enjoyable experience, and it's a very well-made film. It just makes me angry whenever I watch it at the
you have the most interesting read of
that
this.
entire generation. Just I get
I don't
angry.
know why. Clearly, this is your baggage with
Oh,
that
absolutely.
generation, but I don't see any of that. I mean, I don't think the movie is punishing Jenny. I think she's had a really tough time because she's an abused child and she makes poor choices. And not that everybody who's abused is going to make poor choices, but in this case, she does. And I don't think her activism is coming from her at all. She just happens to be with these people. I don't think we're not shown that she really believes in anything per se. She just hopping around. She just, whatever she puts her foot in, after a while, she sort of runs away from it. And she just happens to kind of be in all these places. And so that's how I think they're both sort of driftwood, actually, in a way. And that's why they are connected from childhood, actually. I mean, they both have disadvantages,
Hmm.
him physically, which he overcomes, mentally, etc. But it's a little bit of like he's just handed a different card in the deck than she is. That's kind of how I take it.
Yeah, I mean that's true. I mean another thing that is interesting about this film too, I feel like, is you're right. Like Jenny grew up in a abusive. He was her father molested her,
Yeah.
and that obviously affected her. And she lived her life due to the material conditions of her being very poor and all these different things. And that is, I think, obviously real life. Like those things can
Yeah.
definitely happen. Whereas Forrest Gump seems to be unaffected by anything that's ever around him in a way that I just
But he
find
grew
very
up with
inauthentic.
love. I think that's the big difference. Like Sally, this is why Sally Field's casting, though weird because they're the same age, but Sally Field does emanate so much of warmth and love. And you see that. Like he always had this person, and he says that over and over again, like, Mama always said things in a way that I could understand. And so you have that beaming power of her love and support behind it, which I think she doesn't have. She never did. In
Right,
fact, whenever
right.
she
But
gets it, she runs away from it.
yes, that is true. Though it's Forrest Gump does all these things, and yet nothing. He's not changed or affected by anything, and that is what to me makes it feel inauthentic. Like you go off to war and nothing happened. Like you're the same person before, after, and during going off to war, which I have not done, but obviously that is an experience that changes people in some way, and that's why this character to me has never felt authentic because not being necessarily because of his I don't want to say disability, but his intelligence, we'll say that. It's the fact that he's in every single one of these like important events in the history of the world or history of the 20th century in the United States at least, and just goes through them without being affected by it at all, which I think is not authentic and
That
also
I
not how
would buy. I
the
mean, the
the world
only thing he
works.
seems to be affected by is Jenny and the love he feels for her. And I can see, right? Like when you're going through life, you're not really like, oh, this was an important moment or this will be an important moment. You don't really think about those things. But yeah, if you've been to war, that will do something to you. And we don't really get much of that. And in that sense, the movie is sort of simplistic, I think, because
Yes,
you
yeah.
just see in Gary Sinise's character all the embodiment of war,
Hmm.
the PTSD, the aftermath and struggle, what have you. So I think it's a screenwriting choice that instead of having all of this in one person, they've sort of distributed all of that in other people, which
That's definitely true.
it's a choice for sure.
The main character. It's like the hero of the story. Yes, he has this love from his mom, so he doesn't judge anyone, but then there are situations where he just sort of like writes off things of, oh, they killed this guy for, we don't know, some reason. Or obviously he's related to the Ku Klux Klan, and they sort of use it as a joke, but he's sort of, it's like these things are, not only would it affect you, but you would, as a movie, want to have some opinion or thing you're saying about these major things like assassinations or racist gangs used to go around and terrorize people in America. And the way this movie sort of treats these all as just things like it's like you're reading a history book, like words on a page that you're passing no judgment
But
to
I think
is
that's what they are to him because it's from his point of view. So I think I get that. It's not this movie's job to do that. That's a different movie.
well, the point of view of this movie being that to me is what ties this back to something that I attribute to people who feel like things are just going to happen and hey, you can't do anything or they're not going to affect you or we can't take sides on anything because it's just stuff's going on. And that part of this movie, whether it is a choice or not, again, I hear some things are different in the book, but maybe the author of this book, this is what he was trying to say about history, just to me feels like a bad choice and sending the wrong message about what this very tumultuous time in American history. They sort of gloss over these things where if the point of it is none of this stuff mattered, or you're not supposed to be affected by these things or take a stance on these things. I reject and get angry whenever I see this
I
movie
mean,
at
to me,
that.
it makes it more powerful because it's not spoon fed to you in opinions and speeches, whatever. You get to witness it with Forrest, and you get to kind of make, I mean, the amount of time after watching the movie, me and my partner talked about the Vietnam War and how horrific it was. And we started Googling about it. And it actually led to more conversation and curiosity because it was not spelled out. I think that's what the movie is trying to do. And yeah, some things get away for sure. Like it doesn't all come together. I totally agree with that. But that doesn't bother me because there's so many movies of that nature, and I don't think that's a lazy choice. I think it's purposeful because it's from Forrest's point of view. I don't think he's thinking about these things. He isn't. And by doing so, it's letting the audience then get a bird's eye view and think about these things.
Yeah, I find it lazy, but if it was purposeful, it angers me when I watch it. Just at those elements of it. Listeners, take a gander at
Yeah.
Forrest Gump if you haven't seen it. And yeah, time will continue to evaluate this film. I think is a film that has a lot of still cultural resonance because of even this discussion we're having. I think the film
Yeah.
works on that level. It makes people are still talking about Gump. Hi there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I review a new release and then discuss 6 other movies made by that film's actor or director and how they shaped us. Subscribe right now or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.